Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is episode 311 of Milwaukee's Tailgate Brewers podcast, part of the MKE Tailgate Network. I'm James, joined by the whole gang, Ryan and Paul, here on a Sunday morning because the Packers play late, and we all want to watch that and see if Taylor Swift shows up. So, as we record this, Jackson Chourio extension, not officially official, but definitely seems that way. We've got a ton of questions, but first, Paul, welcome back. How you been?
I've been fine, doing a lot of holiday travel, but glad to not be doing that at the moment.
It is the busy time of year for sure.
Yep.
Yeah. Ryan, how's your morning going?
Well, Liverpool have scored 2 great goals, but have also conceded 2 really poor goals, and we're headed into the second half. So we'll see how this ends up. But they don't generally lose at home. They don't generally not win at home. So it should be fine. But yeah, they've really had let a couple of very easy goals go here. But the 2 goals they scored were great. And also, before we dig in, I did want to say thank you to all the 16 people who donated to our sort of last second charity drive that we did this last week for Hunger Task Force. We ended up having 16 people donate, and it was a total of over $1,000. So we were really, really pleased with that outcome. And congratulations to Tim Braun for on winning the tickets. He managed to get in there and win. So that was pretty wild. We had 33 total entries in the thing because a number of people decided like they couldn't use the tickets or whatever. Yeah, we DQ'd Steve. He gave, but we DQ'd him and said, no, that would look bad. That would just be bad. And Spencer too. Spencer also gave. So yeah, DQ'd a few people. And then we had one person who gave quite a lot of money who said, nah, I can't use them. So I just want to give. So that was greatly appreciated. We will also be doing our standard donation as well. So we'll be adding $500 to that.
Great.
So yeah, really, really happy. The biggest drive we've had, and I don't think it's particularly close because we've been doing this now since COVID, at least once a year. So we'll have to look at doing something next summer too for Brewers tickets. Maybe we'll get a hold of some tickets behind home plate and do the same thing for those.
For sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely appreciated. Super cool to see all you guys step up. Super cute to see Tim post the video telling his daughter I think she's maybe more excited about possibly seeing Taylor Swift tonight, but also
pretty sure.
Good memories there. So congrats again, Tim, and thanks everybody who helped us out there. Reminder too, you can go to patreon.com/MKE tailgate. $2 a month guarantees you get your questions answered both on this podcast and on the Packers Reporting as Eligible podcast. $5 gets you that perk plus the additional exclusive content, the Minor League Extra with Ryan and James Anderson, as well as Paul's Packer mini pods. You can support us another way. Go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you're listening to us right now. Give us a 5-star review. Hit that follow or subscribe button. You can also check us out on YouTube, too, if you miss us on the audio platforms. So let's just kind of dive in because there's a lot of questions about the Jackson Chourio extension and kind of came out of the blue. I don't think any of us were expecting it, but, obviously the imminent extension for Chourio, is probably going to be finalized in the next week or so at the winter meetings. That seems to be everybody's assumption, unless, something problematic shows up on the physical. Everybody's kind of seen the terms by now, but we've gotten some clarity in the last, 24 hours or so, as it appears that maybe they're inching closer to agreeing on that money. So our friend Kurt Hogue at the Journal Sentinel said it's going to be 8 guaranteed years in the $80 to $90 million range, and then the 2 additional team options that could lock him in as a Brewer for the next decade. And at the same time, make sure he still hits free agency, but before he turns 30, which is the wild part to me, that he's going to sign a 10-year deal and still get that mega payday. Yeah. Adam McKelvey said if all the options are picked up and the incentives are hit, the deal could be worth a total of about $140 million over those 10 years. Ken Rosenthal late on Saturday reporting that the 2 club options were for about $25 million a year, and escalators on the deal based on MVP votes could push it as high as $142 million over the full 10 years, which, obviously record-breaking deal, but simultaneously, if he's as good as advertised, maybe still a bargain for the Brewers. So I guess, I don't know how anybody could really be upset about this, but Paul, I guess your takes on initial reactions on those numbers and the deal before we jump into some questions.
My first one is it's so much like a football contract of like, here's your guaranteed money and then here's your non-guaranteed money. It has like the agent money thing about it where, your agent wants to report it's 142, which, I mean, if he's good, it will be. But I do think it's a good deal all around. When you break it down, like 10 years, $114 million a year isn't that much money. It's especially not that much money like 5 years from now with inflation,
right.
And it's not all in current. Well, it is all in current dollars actually. But it looks really good from a team perspective, unless he's just flat out terrible. And I think that they're pretty confident he's not going to be flat out terrible. At the same time, he gets, set for life. He is a 19-year-old with $142 million. Nothing wrong with that. It really just seems kind of like a good one all around. They bought out essentially 4 years of post-control free agency plus, no arbitration nonsense. They don't have to, when this was first reported, I think it was Rosenthal. It was sort of framed as which will have impacts on like service time manipulation, basically, which is a odd and minute point to make, which is they can now bring him up without worrying about things like that whenever they want, maybe to start the season, maybe not, but that's on the table. You don't have to do that. So it takes a lot of nonsense off the table. I like that. No arbitration, no service time manipulation. Everybody's rich. So I think good all around. And I think the odds of Chourio being at least average are great, and the odds of him being, superstar are pretty good. So yay all around.
Yeah, I think that, basically everything down the line there I would agree with. Just to make some additional points here, sort of this avoids, like if you want to compare this to something and look at like if you would have waited, if you had tried to say, okay, let's see what he looks like. Let's have him come up and perform at the big league level. How much could that have potentially cost the Brewers in terms of doing this deal? And I think the Julio Rodriguez contract is really instructive in that. So if you look at Julio Rodriguez, who signed a contract in August of his rookie year, which ended up being a Rookie of the Year campaign. And, obviously Julio Rodriguez is one of the young superstars in the game. And what he ended up signing was a guaranteed 12 years for $209 million guaranteed, but there were escalators in that deal, and this is where it gets really tricky, that could take it well over $400 million total if he's winning MVPs and, putting up the kind of numbers that I guess you kind of assume that somebody like Julio Rodriguez will put up when you do a deal like this. So that's the kind of discount that the Brewers are getting on this by doing it before he comes up. That's the discount that they're getting. Obviously, they're only guaranteed here. I think the report was $82 million, right? Like the actual guarantee here is $82 million. Yeah. If he completely busts out, that would be what the Brewers would owe him. And I think from a year-to-year perspective, they're not going to get much over $20 million in any year, any single year, because this will be – it's not going to be like Paul, you mentioned it was $14 million a year, correct?
If the whole thing hits, yes.
Right, if the whole thing hits. But it's not going to be parceled out that way because the way this works – obviously, early on, the Brewers will be paying less because those years would have been at league minimum. So I went and looked at the Luis Robert and the Eloy Jimenez contracts, which are the closest comps we sort of have for this. Obviously, less dollars because this is a record, but they're comps. And basically, those started off in the first year with like 1.5, then it jumps to like 2.5, and then it's 4. And then once you get into the arbitration years, that's when you start to see, the numbers really start to jump up. But early on, it's going to be relatively low. So the Brewers are going to have some real flexibility here in these early years. And even at the end, the high-end dollar amount in any year is never going to get to the point that like Christian Yelich is even at. So you're never going to see them like get completely bogged down by this contract. So even if it doesn't work, and what we have more about that coming up, but even if it doesn't work, like the downside here for the Brewers is, I mean, it's there, but it's also just not something that you're going to worry about.
It's pretty minimal, yeah.
Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah, it's not something that is going to debilitate them. And yeah, this is still a risk on their part because they are taking a guy who's never played in the big leagues. And honestly, I mean, at this point has half or like couple dozen plate appearances above the AA level because he's barely even played at AAA. So there is still some projection going on here, quite a bit of projection, really. And that's why you get this discount off of what, say Julio Rodriguez got, is you're taking that risk. The Brewers are assuming that risk. And so in so doing, that's why you get that dollar figure.
Yep. And when has our hitting development ever let us down?
Oh,
we have so much about that coming.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you guys. Basically, if you're looking strictly at the AAV, like Paul mentioned, you're paying him like an average player on the open market.
Yeah.
Like your fourth outfielder types are making $10 to $14 million a year. And, even when you get to the point where he's making 20, 25 million, those years are after the Yelich contract expires. So it's not like you're bogging down your entire payroll with just a couple of guys either. So
exactly.
I think they plan this out pretty well. All right, lots of Chourio Patreon questions. Let's just start with Jay Google asking, Ryan, we'll start with you. Just how stunned were you when you got the news Chourio was going to sign a deal, also that it could be for 10 years?
Yeah, the second part was the bigger part because initially in the first day of this, maybe even day plus, we didn't know how far beyond it was going to go because I remember saying something like, well, they have to get beyond the 6 years, right? It doesn't make sense unless you're going beyond the 6 years. So I know at one point we didn't know that, but once we knew that, it was, I guess I was hoping that something like this was possible. I was hoping they could do something like this, but I didn't have any expectation that it was going to happen. It was really just like a hope and a dream, and here we are. So yeah, I wouldn't say I was stunned because I was actually hoping for it, but I wasn't expecting it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I was pretty stunned and skeptical at first, but I was gonna wait and see what the deal is. But I feel like getting like 3 years of free agency was kind of my break-even point for doing something like this because the benefit from a team perspective, guys getting paid, always happy for the guys getting paid. That's fine by me, but it did seem kind of foolhardy for the Brewers if they were only getting like 7 or 8, but basically getting control for 10 is well worth it, honestly.
Right.
It's hard to criticize that. That's a lot of free agency and arbitration bought out. So yeah, I was actually very surprised it got done. And I do get why it did get done. He's a rich person now, but I'm kind of shocked. These don't happen that often,
Yeah, and they do seem to happen more so at this dollar level. Like the two guys that I cited, Luis Robert and Eloy Jimenez, are Latin American guys. They're guys coming out of the international market. Some of the other deals, Singleton, Scott Kingery, who was the third one?
Evan White was one.
Evan White. Yeah, those were
Evan
domestic
Longoria
signings.
was like the first one. Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
No, but Longoria signed he had
2 days after his
debut. It was 2 days in that
different.
he did it. Yeah, so it's just slightly different. But yeah, the thing about it is that it's when you're talking about that kind of time period, when you're looking at that length of a deal, one thing that this does also do is it gives the Brewers cost certainty. They know what Jackson Chourio is going to cost them for this time period. So they can plan around that. They can budget. They can do a long-term planning based on that money. And so having that sort of cost certainty in place, people sometimes scoff at the idea of cost certainty, but for teams who are trying to set budgets and trying to look down the road, and obviously the Brewers have they definitely value the long-term outlook on everything. This is incredibly helpful for that because they know what they're going to be paying the guy, sort of regardless, up until at least that 9th and 10th year.
Yeah, I think it's nice too that, granted, Jackson Chourio's age plays into this too, but sometimes with these deals, I know Ryan, you've been one to be like, oof, the Ozzy Albies deal is just kind of feels like you're taking advantage of somebody in
Yep.
poor circumstances. But in this case, it feels a little bit different in that, obviously $140 million total is going to be very nice for Jackson Chourio and his future family. But also, there's still that opportunity to really make another big contract really quickly after that. So I feel like we feel a little bit better about this scenario.
Yeah, no, well, and to be clear, those deals were also signed. So the Acuna deal and the Albies deal were signed after they had already proven it
Right.
at the big league level. So they should have been significantly higher based on that. Like they had already established that they were really, really good young major league players at that point. And frankly, what those deals reek of is a situation where, and we don't know this for sure, but like agents, so both of those guys were very low dollar signings. They weren't represented by big agencies. And when guys are represented by smaller agents, there can sometimes be pressure by those agents to sign below market deals because they want to make sure that they get theirs. Those agents want to make sure that that young player doesn't have their head turned by some other agent, by the Scott Borases of the world, because if that happens, they get nothing. Like that agent doesn't make anything other than what is agreed to under their representation. So that was a thing that everybody has talked about with those deals where it was like, there was some shady doings there. And that is not the case here. Jackson Chourio, first off, got a much, much higher signing bonus. Albies and Acuna were under, I think they were both under like $150,000. Jackson Chourio got like 1.9 million, and he's represented by a legitimate big time MLB agent.
Yeah.
And so that isn't a concern here the same way. He's not getting bad advice. Now, if the agent went to him and said, look, this is something you can choose to do or you can choose not to do, this will limit your upside, though obviously with him becoming a free agent by the time he's 30, that still does open up that possibility of a really big second contract, right? So that he does have that going because he's coming up so young. But they would have gone in and given him the full explanation. Hey, this comes with some downside for you. You might not get as much as you otherwise would get, but you're guaranteed this money. So yeah, that's the calculus that goes on there. This is not one of those situations. You don't have to worry about him having been taken advantage of in this case, the way that Acuna and especially Albies probably were taken advantage of.
All right, moving on, we've got Throb Zombie with our next question saying, this seems like an extremely smart move from the team. Should I be mad at Mark Atanasio for stunting the growth of a star or for being too cheap to sign players in 2028? Oh boy. There's another question about the PR aspect of this, Paul, but what do you think?
I saw a lot of like now they can pretend they don't have to do anything because they shelled out this money, and I mean that's cynical. It's maybe true, but in the grand scheme of things, if as soon as he's up and producing, this will be below market and a money saving deal if that's the case. So I don't know. Maybe I don't put billionaires anything past them to sell things like that. But yeah, I think the bigger worry is probably just that we haven't had a lot of bats come out of the minors, honestly. So that one, yes, I'm sure that'll be a lot of questions here. But no, we shouldn't be mad at that yet. Don't get preemptively mad at the team for doing things they haven't done yet. Wait until they do them and then get mad at them.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what's the argument that he would be stunting his growth here?
I think he's just in our system. I read that as just a rip that he's in our system at all, but I could be wrong about that.
Or bringing him up too early, maybe, before he's fully developed. Although there's not a whole lot he has left to prove in the minors. I think it's just kind of tongue in cheek.
Okay. I didn't know if there was like some specific thing here because I have heard people be like, well, now he's going to have pressure on him and like he has to produce or he's going to be like aspersions cast and whatever. And I guess there's some sort of risk of like pressure or whatever. But I tend to think that like in situations like this, and players have talked about this, that like they the pressure of signing as agreeing to a deal when you're 13 or 14 years old and having to leave to go to another country and produce and be good and all of that, that if that doesn't like hold you back, if that is not something that stops a player from becoming like a top prospect, they're probably going to be okay with the other challenges too. Like that isn't going to be too much for him, I wouldn't think. So you have to kind of understand the full breadth of these situations and take into account that there's, you know, there's a whole series here. He didn't just come into existence when the Brewers signed him, I guess is the point.
Sure. Kind of related, My Only Lemonade asking, thankfully, the Chourio signing arrives just after the council PR disaster. However, I can't help thinking the front office could have made a little bit more hay with a little forethought. Case in point, my brother follows the team somewhat closely and has two teenage kids doing the same, but no one in the family had even heard of Chourio before this week. Did the Brewers PR team drop the ball by not hyping him more? Didn't we all know about Weeks and Fielder years before their arrival? So kind of an interesting thought here. I know, Ryan, you're making a face. A lot of people who follow the minors know who Jackson Chourio are, but not everybody, you know, has the time to sit down and follow everything like this.
Well, okay, so first off, they did the freshman series this year, and they did a whole episode built around Jackson Chourio, and that was out on all their socials and all of that. And they were putting information about Chourio out through their Twitter feed as well. I don't know what they were doing on Instagram or Facebook because I don't really pay attention to Instagram and Facebook, but they were doing something, weren't they? Like
I don't feel like they were doing less than they did with the Braun Fielder, like Hardy Hart class. Maybe
right.
Like they mentioned Jackson Chourio on broadcasts, like on TV and on radio, and you know he's been like the number 1 or 2 in baseball for a while now. So I don't. I'm a weirdo who knows more about baseball than casual fans do, so it's hard to understand what they know and what they don't know. But,
right.
Yeah.
I feel like it was the same level of hype, but maybe not.
Well, I mean, and Kurt has been writing about him faithfully at least a couple times a month, going back to last year. Like, so it's in the Journal Sentinel a lot. There's lots of, if you're following anybody who knows anything about prospects, I mean, if you're following Baseball America, if you're following MLB Pipeline or any of those things, it would be hard to have missed Chourio. Paul, you're right. Like we're weirdos who are very in the weeds on this stuff. And exactly. So we're very tightly, you know, into it. But I also think that they did talk about Chourio a lot. Like I feel like he has been mentioned. Maybe one of the things that keeps that from being like mentioned even more is the fact that he's so young, and maybe there was some reticence to hype him too much. Maybe they were wary about overhype. Maybe
I feel like the prospect I've known the most about in Brewer history is Nick Neugebauer. So maybe they're a little gun shy after that.
Yeah, I mean, there's also just the idea that at the time of Braun, Fielder, Weeks, the major league team was
sucked,
hot garbage. So that was what people had to get excited about. So that's what people kind of focused on, and that was the focus. During this time period, the Brewers have actually been good while they've been building this really good farm system. So it makes sense that there would be less focus on that. There wouldn't be as much attention paid to it, but I still feel like there was a lot of attention paid to it. So, I mean, like you said, there was that full episode of The Freshman that focused specifically on him. So, I'm not sure they could have done a lot more that would have been, would have made sense. I mean, when he came up to Wisconsin last summer, in the summer of 2022, that was a huge event, and like people were talking about that, and people were going. I mean, I dropped everything and went that first Friday to go see him play, and drove up to Appleton for that. So, and there were a lot of other, that was a very full crowd. There were a lot of people there. They were there to see Jackson Chourio. So I don't know how deep in the weeds you'd necessarily have to be in this case.
Sure. I think just looking at it from my perspective of being in media, and when you're in it, you always feel like, well, we did that. We did XYZ. We put a lot out there, and then people will still come back and say, well, how come I didn't know about this? It's just, people's habits change. It's hard to say exactly especially if you're the type that, very busy life, not necessarily checking in on all the Brewers games. It's possible you miss those, on-air pieces or the Twitter pieces. It's just hard to say. But regardless, I'm not going to cast aspersion on anybody who may not have, followed the minors that much. There are people that I work with who are like, you're going to give this money to this kid I've never heard of before. That is out there. I think it's worth acknowledging. And
Sure.
I think the team's got some proof to do, whether it's this week at the press conference or, in the early parts of the season. And, if he comes up and isn't amazing right away, that does, cause some potential problems down the line, but we'll talk about that when we talk about Zips projections. All right. Adam Post asking, does the extension increase the likelihood that Chourio makes the opening day roster? I think, you don't really do this unless you're ready to bring him up, I think. But Ryan, what are your thoughts? Is he on the opening day roster now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely is much, much more likely. Oh, yeah. I think it's overwhelmingly likely he will be on the opening day roster. I think the only thing that could really stop it would be a significant injury, like something that would keep him on the IL, or potentially just a really bad spring training where he just looks bad and he seems overmatched. Maybe he's trying too hard. Maybe he's pushing or something too hard, and they need to just be like, whoa, relax, take a deep breath, go down, smack the crap out of some AAA pitching for a little bit, and we'll get you up quickly. So I think it is overwhelmingly likely that they would bring him up. And especially now that the money part of this is settled, they stand to potentially gain that draft pick. So right. that is a really, really good reason. Now, he doesn't have to be on the opening day roster to potentially be eligible for that draft pick, but he would have to be up by the middle of April. I don't know the exact date this year, but it's the sort of middle of April, because that would be the only way for him to get a full year of service this year, would be if he's up by, that date in the middle of April. And I would think that they would want to do that now at this point, since the money is taken care of, that I would sort of put that as, unless something disastrous has happened, that would sort of be the last possible date you'd likely see him, would be that middle of April time period.
Luke Roy Suitcase, our next question, asking, what are the 10%, 50%, and 90% outcomes for the Chourio contract? Are there holes in his game that are likely to be exposed at the MLB level? Also, who do you think is leaking the Chourio info to the press? Is it the front office or the agent? It makes me think it's the agent, given that the Brewers front office is usually quite tight-lipped. Interesting thought on the end there, Paul. What do you think?
I think originally it was the team, because the way it was originally framed was in the framing of service time manipulation no longer being on the table, and agents wouldn't. I mean, they do care about that a little bit, but it sounded very team to me. But there's a lot of incentive for everybody to get this out there. The Brewers from a PR standpoint, the agent from a PR standpoint. So my best guess is everybody's leaking the heck out of this, and there's probably some corrective back and forth leaks coming from both sides too. So that would be that. And as for outcomes, let's do the top two first. Like the 90% outcome is that he's like one of the 5 best players in baseball for a very long time, and I think that's more on the table with him than your general player. I think the 50% with him, because he is such a good prospect, is something more like a fringe all-star every once in a while, and like a 3 to 4 win player. And his 10% is probably slightly below average, just because his tools and his power are so good. It's going to be hard for him to be that below average unless there's some Steve Blass disease, he forgets how to throw, or like just can't hit a curveball at all randomly or some crap like that. But you can't predict that. Those are like 1% outcomes. So his floor is high. I do think his floor is quite high, just because even if a bunch of stuff doesn't work out, he can still be a productive major league outfielder. It's higher than most other people.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I guess I was sort of looking at comps, and I think the 90 and 10 are the easiest. The 50 is the hardest one to me. 90th, it's Ronald Acuna, but without that injury that cost him 2021 and kind of hampered him in 2022. Like the 90th percent outcome is he's, well into a Hall of Fame career by the time he becomes a free agent 10 years from now. That would be sort of the 90th percentile outcome. Probably not like, Mike Trout, where he's like a lock Hall of Famer at that point, but where he's like, he doesn't have a ton of work to do in his 30s. He just needs to have sort of a normal decline. That would be the 90th percent outcome. Would be, he's well into a Hall of Fame career.
Mike Trout's like a 1%er. That's not a 90. That's a 99% career.
Right. Yeah. And I think 10%, I'm going to go lower than you did here, Paul, just because there is risk here. We're going to get more into it in the next question, but there is risk here. And I've seen enough top prospects just, flame out that the possibility does exist. Joe Adell, think Joe Adell for that 10th percentile outcome. Joe Adell has been up and down. He's got about 600 plate appearances now in the big leagues, and he's a negative WAR player. He's like negative 1.6. And I think that sort of, now the thing with Adell is he's not like a true center fielder, and it looks like Chourio is, and he's probably an above average defensive center fielder. So he's got some like floor that maybe Adell didn't have. So maybe that's a little ungenerous, but I still think that like that 10% is just, he doesn't hit, and he never really is able to make contact at a high enough level. And something about his swing, his approach, something about it doesn't play at the big league level. I think that risk is there. Maybe 10% is too high. Maybe that's more like the 5th percentile outcome, but it's definitely in there. And I think people need to recognize that is a possibility. Obviously the Brewers don't do this if they think that's, at all a likely outcome. But I still think that it's a possible outcome that we have to sort of bake into our thought process on this.
Yeah. Fair.
50% is really hard. I went back and forth on this. Like, I think what was your exact wording? You said like sometime
Fringe
all-star. Okay.
Yeah.
Fringe all-star. Yeah, I like that. Where like he makes a few all-star
Corey
games.
Hart kind of thing.
Corey Hart's a good comp. Yeah. Like
yeah, like Corey Hart, but if Corey Hart was like a really good defensive center fielder for a while.
Sure.
Which gives, additional value. I think that kind of, though Corey Hart did struggle. Remember, there was a time period in 2008, 2009 where a lot of people wanted to be rid of Corey Hart and were like, okay, and then he went on the power binge in May of 2010 and then was, good for a while after that. But there was some time period there where he really struggled. So I don't know if that's the part of the 50th percentile outcome, but Corey Hart was a guy I was also sort of thinking of like in the overall, sort of value. I think maybe a little bit better than that as a 50th percentile outcome, but that really gets into this next question from JD. So let's just jump to that.
Sure. I guess speaking of the swing concerns, maybe you alluded to, came up in Eric Longenhagen's write-up on Fangraphs. So JD's asking, what do you think of the Chourio Zips projections from the Longenhagen article? They seem quite good, but also I want more. Am I expecting too much? So if you haven't seen this, they threw the Zips projections in there, and I guess maybe understandably, they're projecting Chourio to be below league average offensively the next 2 years because, he's 20. So, it'd be a lot to ask for a 20-year-old to come up and start hitting right away. So they project him for an OPS plus of 91 this year, 97 next year. But the good defense you guys talked about still makes him close to a 1.5 to 2 win player in that time per year. And then obviously Zips gets more optimistic after that, turns 22, kind of rounds into form, project him to be an above average offensive player every year after that. So in total, over the 8 guaranteed years they ran the projections for, they have him being worth 20.9 Fangraphs WAR over those 8 years, average yearly WAR of about 2.6 and an OPS of 105. So it's hard to project a guy like Chourio, especially Zips, because, they need that historical context, that backdrop to project from. And really, he's only been this uber prospect for Ryan, 1.5 2 years. So there's not a lot of data to go off of here. It's hard to project someone like that. But then also, from a scouting standpoint, Eric's not super thrilled with his contact, right? Like there's some risk there that he talked about.
Yeah, there's definitely some risk. First, I want to jump back to the Zip stuff, though. I feel like, 20-ish WAR over those 8 years is a nice middle ground sort of projection. That's definitely more than what Corey Hart did in that time period in his career.
True.
So, but I feel like that's a good sort of place, because obviously if he is the superstar we're hoping he is, then he's probably up in the 40, 50 range. Like that would be more of where, like, if he's a true superstar, he would start racking up some really big numbers there. So I think that is a pretty good estimator. It's going to be difficult if he is a below average hitter as a rookie. People are gonna, there's gonna be some ugliness, because if you're a below average hitter overall, there's gonna be some time periods where he looks really lost.
Yeah,
and that's going to be ugly from a sort of a fan perspective. It could get nasty at various points during that. So hopefully he just stays away from that sort of thing and doesn't engage and doesn't even pay attention to it, because that can be difficult. But I think it's also a fair expectation. Now, I think there is also a pretty reasonable world here where one thing we've seen, and this is noted in Longenhagen's article, is that Chourio has made such big leaps already. Like, Longenhagen talks about having seen him during the spring of 2022, and Longenhagen wasn't overly impressed. Like, he was, this guy's like a talented young player and good, but Longenhagen wasn't thinking that this guy was going to set the world on fire and become the next big prospect at that point. And he has just improved so much over these 18 months to get to the point where he's at, and that he just keeps getting better. And that was sort of the thing that, if you want to hold on to like a positive thing from the Eric Longenhagen piece, it's how much he has improved and how much he just keeps getting better at doing the things that he's going to need to do to be a successful player. So that's the positive. If we want to get into the negative of like the swing concerns, he thinks there's some stiffness there, and that he could have some problem with fastballs high in the zone. Like, that is, and I know a few of you who really know your stuff are screaming right now, because that's what happened with
Keston Hira alarm bells are going off in my head, Ryan. Yes.
Right, but just because it's the same sort of general issue does not mean it's anything like the extent of it. Like, don't draw that conclusion from it. Don't be like, oh no, he's just Keston Hira 2.0. Don't go thinking that. It's just like that is the area of concern, is that he's potentially going to have some issues doing that. Now, again, he mentions here, I'm kind of skimming through this again real quick. He mentions that the strikeout rate has consistently improved since he got into Pro Ball. When he came up, first off, one thing that was happening, he was swinging and missing, and he is swinging and missing less now. And he's just striking out less in general now. And so you can see the rapid improvement, think about this, as a young guy moving up competition levels fast. Jackson Chourio has moved up levels of competition quite quickly. And the fact that he is improving on those things while being moved at a fast pace says that this guy is, he is a precocious talent. Like, this is a guy who really, really has something, because generally guys don't improve while they're being moved quickly. You know what I mean? Just keeping your head above water is good enough, while he is showing some real signs of improvement, especially on the strikeout rate side. So there's positives to be drawn here.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add to that, which is all correct, is that projection systems like Zips, not exclusive to Zips, struggle with outliers. They are designed to compress everybody into a narrow band. They're designed to go on a 3-year weighted average for, guys with some kind of a track record, even a longer one in the minors. And if guys are extremely good, they tend to not project quite as well as they do in real life. And so, there's no guarantee he's going to turn into the super mega star outcome here. But the fact that is more on the table for him than it is for like your average prospect means that that projection is probably a little bit on the low side in the grand scheme of things.
Absolutely. And I think too, going back to just the pay and the annual average value, like this kind of WAR production would be totally in line, and frankly probably still outproduce the contract that they're giving him, right? Like, I mean, based on a win per WAR,
like all-time Brewers, 20 WAR is probably like the 8th best player ever in team history.
Right. Also that, so again, like I can see being like just kind of disappointed given the hype, but your guys' points that, projection systems are by their nature conservative, especially when they don't have a 3-year data set to work from. I feel oddly comforted by this a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's all totally true. And he also goes into some makeup stuff about Chourio that like he plays like his hair is on fire. And I've seen that in person. When I saw him, he went and made some ridiculous running catches. He was busting his ass out in the outfield. I mean, he really, really was. And he plays a certain way, and Longenhagen likes how that's going to fit with a number of guys who are sort of the same way in Mitchell, Frelick, Weimer. They all sort of kind of fit that same mold. And he kind of name checks them and says, oh, and Willie Adames, guys like that they all sort of play that way. You do have to worry. He's got to be smart about how he does it. You don't want him running through walls. The famous Bill Jaymes thing about how Paul Molitor would have been better if he wasn't running through walls, because Paul Molitor ended up hurt a lot because he was running through walls. Yeah. So he's got to be careful about how he does that. But you like to see it from a makeup standpoint that he's busting his ass out there. And
yeah,
so those things are definitely a positive from that perspective.
That WAR projection would make him the 12th best offensive Brewer of all time. So
there we go.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean it would put him in rarefied air. And just to your point, the open market these days, it's around $10 million per win. The Brewers would be paying $82 million for 20 wins, so about $4 million per win. It's a huge discount on what anything like what you could get on the open market. I mean, just a huge, massive discount.
All right, speaking of some of the names Ryan just brought up, Mark Podscarby's asking, does the fact that Chourio had reverse platoon splits in the last few years increase his value in the eyes of the front office? Okay, real question. Where does Chourio spend most of his time defensively? How does he stack up to Mitchell, Frelick, Weimer, and Perkins?
Okay, before we go past the joke, because I do want to address it, because it is real. He does actually have reverse platoon splits.
I looked it up just because, on a whim myself before reading the question, and I was like, God damn it, really?
It's important to note that his numbers against left-handed pitching are still pretty good. This is not like a guy who struggles against left-handed pitching, and I think you could make some pretty reasonable. First off, he rarely saw left-handed pitching in 2022, and that's because there aren't that many left-handed pitchers out there. Especially in the lower minors, most guys are right-handed, and so I think a big part of this is Jackson Chourio hasn't seen a lot of left-handed pitching, period. There's just not that many out there that have any sort of like really good stuff. You start to see them more and more as you get older and older. And his numbers this year against left-handed pitching were fine. Yeah, his OPS was like 750 or something, and his overall his OPS against right-handers was around 8. So this is not a problem. It's not like something to freak out about. It probably, like I said, has more than anything just to do with the fact that he hasn't seen that many lefties, period.
That's fair. Outfield logjam, though. Where does he fit in? I mean, obviously, he's always been prime for center, so I guess what does that mean for the Mitchells and Frelicks of the world?
Well, it means that they have a lot of flexibility and they can do a lot of different things here. They can go a lot of different directions with this. And if they decide maybe to protect him by not having him play center field, that is an option. They could use him in either right or probably left, and just have him be like an absolutely stunningly great left fielder. They could do that. And then have Garrett Mitchell playing center field. If Mitchell turns out and works out that way, you could have Garrett Mitchell playing center field, because Mitchell is, some of the StatCast numbers we've seen on him point to being truly exceptional defensively.
Yeah.
So you could do that. Or it does open up possibilities of trades if somebody comes and knocks the door down for you. But I want to caution about that and say, the Brewers are in absolutely no hurry to deal any of their outfielders right now. They don't need to.
Right.
They don't. There's no need to move anybody. They don't have to make a decision. They could sort of let this play out a little bit and see who is who and what is what, and let it sort of work out. Now, yes, you could potentially, if you end up trading away the worst guy of that group, you can lose some potential value in that trade. But there's nothing pressing them to do something. I guess the fact is, if Chourio is up on opening day, that does give them 6 outfielders potentially, with Frelick, Mitchell, Weimer, Tyrone Taylor and Christian Yelich, along with Chourio, it does give you 6, and that's too many. But you can also send somebody down to AAA. If somebody struggles in spring training, Joey Wiemer struggles in spring training, Garrett Mitchell struggles in spring training, those guys can be sent down to AAA. And then there's also the DH spot where you can play a guy at DH, and so that also opens up more flexibility roster-wise for you to be able to do things. So they don't have to trade anybody.
Yeah, right. They don't have to, but that's part of the flexibility as well. Like if somebody comes calling for any of them, they can do that and sweeten the deal. But yeah, they're probably also not in a hurry because like, what are you going to get back for Wiemer right now? You know,
Sure.
People have seen that, and ideally you would like to trade the guys who are least likely to play. So yeah, but yeah, real quick though, how do you think, like, if you had to rank center fielders on the team, where would you put him?
That's a good question.
Like just defensively, not.
Having not seen him play the amount that I've seen some of these other guys play at this point, man, he's really, really good though. There's talk that he's really improved this year as well. Like he's gotten a lot better. Longenhagen mentioned that in the piece. I probably would defer to the idea that Mitchell is still probably the best, just because we have some amazing numbers on Mitchell.
Yeah, all of Mitchell's stat guys is great. I agree with that.
Is unbelievably good, but I would have a hard time believing he's lower than number 2, especially because he has an arm in a way that like Sal Frelick doesn't.
Right.
Yeah. So and the thing is, Joey Wiemer was really spectacular in center field last year too. So it's a very good problem to have, but you are kind of picking and choosing from among a bunch of guys who are all above average big league center fielders, between above average to exceptionally above average.
Sure. Yeah. And to your guys' point, it's not like they have to trade somebody, and you know, Mitchell is not necessarily the epitome of durable. So, you know, there might be injuries to play out, but let's just assume that they do make a trade. Price Trozen is asking who's going to be the odd man out in this stacked outfield. I'd sure miss Tyrone Taylor if it were going to be him that gets traded. Do you think he's the most likely to be moved? That would be my guess, but I kind of hope I'm wrong. Paul, I think might make sense because obviously out of options and most likely to be moved in that sense.
I feel like once you hit the out of options level of play, that you are automatically your spot becomes much more tenuous for sure. So Taylor would be my bet. You know, he's a little older. He's a depth piece. And he's a good one. I like Tyrone Taylor, but like everybody else is kind of a depth piece as well with options too that you know are all much younger. So I suspect eventually he is the odd man out, but it also kind of depends on who's producing. Like if Wiemer's just hopeless, then he won't be up. He'll just be down, and you may still need a guy, especially if Mitchell is hurt or if anybody else is hurt or anybody else struggles. So I think it's not a foregone conclusion, but I do think as soon as things get tight roster-wise, that Tyrone Taylor is probably in danger.
Yeah, I think I agree with that all. There's also the matter of Tyrone Taylor is going to be more expensive than the rest of them. He's now in arbitration. So that also comes into play here. And I think there is a duplication of skills here. I think that Joey Wiemer is like a potentially much better version of what Tyrone Taylor gives you in that he can really crush left-handed pitching. Remember, Joey Wiemer, for all his faults last year, had an OPS over 800 against left-handed pitching last year. So for everything that's wrong with Joey Wiemer's game, he still did pretty well crush left-handed pitching until that last few weeks. So when he was just kind of hopeless against everybody, but overall he did crush left-handed pitching, and that I think makes Taylor, whose main thing is he crushes left-handed pitching, a little bit redundant. But I don't think they're in any hurry. I don't think they need to make a move. But I think it's if I had to pick any one of them who isn't going to be on the opening day roster, it's definitely Tyrone Taylor.
All right. One last Jackson Chourio question this week comes from Morgoth 10. Kind of a fun or funny one. When Chourio makes the bigs at 19 or 20, which brewer is most likely to be the one that, quote unquote, acquires drinks for him at the bar? Or put another way, which brewer is most likely to aim to bet underage drinking?
Can I just say, in the words of Bryce Harper, this is a clown question, bro. Remember when Harper was asked if he was going to go out and celebrate his birthday or his first home, whatever it was. He was asked if he was going to go out drinking, and he was under 21, and he just looked at the reporter and said, "That's a clown question, bro."
Come on, man.
Yeah. I don't know, and I'm cautious to cast allegations of breaking the law on anybody in a platform that could get us in trouble. Paul, any idea?
I feel like Willie Adames is above the law, and probably him. And no one should take that as negative. I just think he's the least likely to care. Just be like, hey, but I mean, it's a baseball team. It won't be hard. You're in Wisconsin. Everybody will be buying him drinks.
Yes, absolutely. All right, one. Or a couple, I should say, non-Jackson Chourio questions. We still, of course, have the Corbin Burnes situation, which, rumors seem to be kind of ramping up there ahead of the winter meetings on possibly Ryan's celebrating. So I imagine Liverpool did something good.
Scored, yeah.
Liverpool just scored, yes.
Okay. Anyway, Corbin Burnes might get traded this week. Logan Inderdahl is asking, would you guys be disappointed if the team used Burnes to get an infield option for 2024, a la a Gleyber Torres or a Jorge Polanco? My initial reaction is disappointment, but after a little thought, and if the crew receives some prospect capital on top, I can be convinced. I don't know about you guys, but I kind of feel like, especially with Matt Arnold maybe running this more razy than David Stearns would, the counter building thing, and maybe just getting major league ready people in exchange for Burnes is kind of important. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't like Gleyber Torres personally, although good season last year.
Yeah, he did. I was surprised.
Whenever I watch him, he sucks. But
the Yankees stunk,
numbers, so he's been good. Yeah, I can be convinced of that one. It is their MO. I think major league ready young plus prospects pretty likely to happen, and that would be fine. That's what they do. But I don't know. Ryan, really happy now. I'd be okay with that. I don't know. It's hard to judging deals in advance for me is tricky business. I actually feel like Gleyber might be a little old for that kind of thing, to be perfectly honest. He's been in the league quite a while now. Jorge Polanco, fine too. I think the thing with trading Burnes, is everybody's going to expect back the world for Corbin Burnes, and that it's just always going to be disappointing in a vacuum to you. And maybe a couple guys they get prospect wise work out in a while, but you're not going to get back Jackson Chourio 2 for Corbin Burnes. That's just not going to happen. He's a good pitcher, but he is a flawed pitcher, and he is expensive, and so you're going to be slightly limited in what you get back. You're either going to get back young major leaguers who are maybe something and kind of decent prospects, or maybe some far down the road good prospects, and that's probably how that's going to go.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be a multiple player situation. I would be surprised if it's somebody that's as close to free agency and as expensive as Gleyber Torres and Jorge Polanco. Like those guys,
they're pretty close to not being on teams anymore anyway.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about like guys who are in the big leagues, I think it's going to be guys with control years left, like the way when they traded for Eric Lauer. He had been in the big leagues. He had like a year plus of service time, but he was just getting going, kind of. It like somebody that's not nearly that close. And I think it's going to be multiple players, because we've seen that over and over. They like to get multiple players. And I think they'll probably diversify their portfolio here and get some different sorts. Maybe there is a guy who's like a lottery ticket, a young player they really like in there, along with some guys who are, maybe more able to help them in the short term, as opposed to like really big upside. So I think they're going to get a variety of players in any sort of deal like this. But I would never say like I'm shut off to the idea of Gleyber Torres in a deal like this. I mean, it could be potentially fine, but yeah, that's a situation where Gleyber Torres doesn't bring much surplus value to the equation. And So he would have to be like weirdly, he would be like the headliner of the deal in terms of what people would notice, but he probably from a value perspective wouldn't be the headliner of the deal because there's just not a lot of surplus value there beyond what, he is. So
Sure.
it's a little bit of a tricky idea. And I think the main thing to remember with Burns is that you're not trading Corbin Burns. You're trading 1 year of Corbin Burns making $15 million. And those are significantly different propositions.
Yep.
Like that's the most important thing to remember.
You don't have the Bears to take him and give you back a bunch of prospects and sign him to a market contract. That's not a thing in baseball.
We made that joke with Spencer when you were gone. It's amazing.
Dang it!
I wish it.
I was so proud of myself, Paul, because I made that joke and I'm like, it's not the Bears. Like, there's no Bears out there to be able to do this. And I'm like, yes, Paul would be so proud of me right now.
I am proud of you. Good work.
Last question this week comes from Bill Rabe asking, say it is 5 to 10 years ago and you're discussing which former Brewer will one day become the team's manager. Who would you have predicted? I then would have said Cirillo, Loretta, Seitzer, or Blanco. Not Weeks or Villanueva. Too late for Simmons, too early for votes. P.S. Is Paul Molitor the only former Brewer to become manager and manager? Yeah. Or at least manager of the year. There are several ex-Brewer position coaches. So I guess first part, Paul, 5 to 10 years ago, if you're looking at, potential future managers, who would you identify?
I probably wouldn't have picked out Weeks either. I usually just go for catchers on that. And I got to say, nobody from that team struck me as particularly cerebral. Like Ryan Braun can barely string a sentence together. And
he strung a few together famously. But no Johnny Estrada love? Come on.
I hate Johnny Estrada. He sucked. I'm mashing all their catchers together in my brain right now. George Kataris, maybe. I don't know. It's hard to predict them. We don't know anything about these guys at all. Like we just project onto them what we see. So, Weeks may very well be like a baseball genius. Top prospects are often very good at thinking about things like that. And I never thought enough about Villanueva to think anything of him after he was off the team.
Sure.
So we're just making stuff up. I don't think it'll be Yelich. I'll tell you that going forward. Off the current team, no idea. A catcher, a random catcher off the current team. Catchers tend to become managers more than anybody else, but lots just off the top of my head, Dale Swayman was a manager. So we have a good amount of those. I think I don't think he's the only one either. Just it's the one that jumped in my brain immediately. He wasn't a good manager, but he was a manager.
Neither was Molitor, and he still won.
Yeah, there you go.
I wasn't quite sure what he was asking about that, like manager of the year, because you also have didn't what's his face win in Philly the manager of the year award before getting, or no, he won it in San Francisco after he got Gabe Kapler.
Yeah, Gabe Kapler.
He won manager of the year, and he was a Brewer. Yep. So there's that. There's also everybody's favorite Mark Kotze is a manager now for the Oakland Athletics.
So he is
from that same kind of era. He was a fourth outfielder in that same sort of era. Guys like that. Yeah, it's a little hard to predict. I don't know. Like catchers are always a good shout. Like catchers tend to be the ones that do it. So like if Victor Caratini turns out to be like some amazing man, I'm not gonna be shocked about that. Or William Contreras too. Who knows? Like he's still young. It's a little hard to say for sure. But because when guys are younger, they're a little less. And it's also just he hasn't been here that long. We don't have that long of a track record, but just the idea that he improved so much last year defensively makes me think that there's some sort of like adaptability to coaching. And when guys will take coaching, you sort of think maybe they're would be better at giving it. It brings up things like that. But yeah, Weeks and Villanueva, I never would have guessed. There would have been no reason to pick those guys out and say. I will say Blanco is one that I'm a little bit surprised. I think he is coaching now. I'm pretty sure that Henry Blanco is out there coaching. That one would not have shocked me. Like that seemed like a thing because everybody talked about how he was like basically a coach on the field. He was kind of the field general running things out there.
Yeah.
That one that one would not have surprised me at all. So he would have been somebody I would have sort of jumped on in that time period and said, yeah, I think he's going to be a manager. And honestly, we talked about Gabe Kapler too. There's a running joke between myself and Nick Zattel years ago on an old message board where we would joke about the fact that Gabe Kapler will be the manager of the Brewers in like 2020 or whatever. So kind of glad that didn't happen for various reasons. But
Yeah,
I mean,
indeed.
it wasn't a crazy thought that given that the guy did end up becoming a manager who won a Manager of the Year award. So
Yeah. So I have a new answer for who I think will be a manager in the future. My new answer is Brian Anderson, who will become a manager just so he can work his way onto whatever team council's kids end up on and then not play them.
Amazing.
Yeah, okay.
Amazing.
I do love that one. Yeah.
All right. Henry Blanco is coaching. He's the catching and strategy coach for the Washington Nationals currently. So good shout on that. And then like looking at the former Manager of the Year winners, I did not know or realize that they only started giving that out in 1983. So it's in the 80s especially, it's just sort of a lot of Tony La Russa, Sparky Anderson, Bobby Cox. So not a whole lot of variety there until you get into, the 90s and 2000s. So I believe just eyeballing it, Paul Molitor might be the only former Brewer to win that award, unless like I'm forgetting a random Ozzie Guillen half season or something like that. I don't know. All right. Cool. Thanks for the questions, everybody. Reminder, patrons get question priority. Go to patreon.com/MKE tailgate to sign up. $2 a month gets you that perk. We also give a shout out to new patrons when they sign up. Ryan, do we have someone to give thanks to this week?
We do, and actually the fun little story here, because he reached out to us and Paul and him were corresponding back and forth a little bit. But before we get out of here, I do want to mention Ken Rosenthal's report that Wade Miley he thinks, I want to get the exact wording here right, but he thinks Wade Miley is coming back to the Brewers. He thinks that is going to happen. So that would be very helpful. He says, look for a third stint in Milwaukee to materialize in the coming days for free agent left-hander Wade Miley. So big thumbs up from me on that. I don't care what the terms are. I mean, it's going to be a 1-year deal. So big thumbs up from me on that. I don't see any reason why they shouldn't do that. It does really help to flesh out the middle of their rotation, I think.
Yeah.
So pretty positive about that. And we did talk. I also want to mention, because we didn't mention it up front, that Jaymes and I did record a minor league extra this week, and it ended up being supersized. I think it's the longest one we've ever done. And the heart of it was we took and we drafted the players we think who are currently in the organization who are most likely to be on the opening day roster in 2027. So it's a little twist on what Baseball America does when they do here's what the 2027 opening day roster is going to look like. We were going to do that, and then we realized that wasn't going to generate any conversation. So we came up with this, and it went like we had a lot of fun with it. And we also recorded about 20 minutes after the Jackson Chourio is looking at an extension news hit. So we got to have a long discussion about that as well. Awesome. So definitely check that out if you are so inclined. And yeah, I think that that pretty much wraps up all the stuff I had to say. So let's talk about our patron. Yes, let's talk about our patron here. And Mark Hackett has joined up. Thank you very much. And I noticed right away, and I sent this to the group chat. Oh, it came in euros. And I was like, oh, what's going on there? And then Paul said, didn't you read the message? And so I sought out the message. And Paul, you ought to talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Mark's an Irish NFL fan. And so he did ask reporting his eligible question and said, he is, he was very self-deprecating, like, he has a European person's, an Irish person's knowledge of American football, and not as nerdy as we are. Few people are, but he asked a good question, and we of course appreciate everybody listening. And he's taken to doing research and reading a couple books. He actually credited me for recommending, but it was actually Matt. So, glad to have him aboard. And I always think it's cool when people like sports from, not their home areas. And I like, we have soccer listeners on this podcast, and I wish I understood what the rules of cricket were. I've tried to learn them 100 times. I do not understand it, but there you go.
Yeah, same on that. Yeah, it is cool, especially to see when I look at where our listeners are, and you'll see we are the 143rd baseball podcast in Great Britain. And I'm like, oh,
Yep.
Nice.
we have a listener in Great Britain. So whenever I see those international numbers, I always smile a little bit at some of the random places that people are listening from.
We're big in Portugal.
We are big in Portugal. Yeah. No, that was actually I think it was Portugal.
Yeah.
I
was trying to remember.
Yeah, we had like randomly like maybe 2 listeners or something that were coming from Portugal. So that's fun.
Amazing. Well, thanks, Mark, for signing up. Appreciate it. Patreon.com/MKE tailgate. That's where you can sign up. Definitely worth a listen to get Jaymes Anderson's take on the Jackson Chourio deal too on that minor league extra. That's the $5 level. Go there and sign up for that if you're interested. I think that'll do it for this week. So obviously dominated by Jackson Chourio. We're headed into the winter meetings, so probably some news to come out in the next week. We'll be back here next time to kind of recap all of that. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we will see you next time here on Milwaukee's Tailgate.